There is a temple in northern Japan where a single doll sits behind glass, watched day and night by priests. She wears a faded red kimono, her porcelain face forever frozen in the same quiet expression. But there is one thing about her that refuses to remain the same. Her hair keeps growing. For more than a century, the priests have cut it over and over again, yet each time it grows back, longer than before. Some believe the spirit of a little girl lives inside the doll. Others believe something much older and far more dangerous only chose to wear her face. Most people dismiss it as nothing more than an old Japanese legend. My family did too, until my grandfather died and left that very doll to us, along with 3 handwritten warnings. Do not throw her away. Do not cover her face. And whatever happens, never cut her hair after sunset. We ignored every one of those warnings. My name is Kenji Nakamura, and what happened over the next 2 nights destroyed everything we thought we knew about the Okiku doll. Because some haunted objects don't just want to be remembered, they want to come home. I was 17 years old when my grandfather died during the winter of 1998. He had spent the last years of his life alone in a small village outside Sapporo, surrounded by endless cedar forests and snow-covered hills. We rarely saw him, and apart from a package he mailed every New Year, he had almost disappeared from our lives. Then, one cold December evening, my father received a phone call from the village police. Grandfather had been found dead inside his house, sitting peacefully in front of his family altar. There were no signs of violence, no illness, and no evidence that anyone had entered the home. The officer said only one strange thing stood out. When they found him, his eyes were wide open, fixed on a small doll sitting in the room. 3 days later, our family drove through heavy snowfall to settle his affairs. The village felt frozen in time, silent except for the wind moving through the trees. Waiting outside the house was the same police officer, who handed my father the keys before hesitating, as if he were debating whether to tell us something. Finally, he admitted that every door in the house had been standing open when they arrived, except for one locked bedroom upstairs. Inside that room, he said, they had found nothing except a single doll. Even stranger, when the officers returned the following morning, the locked door had opened by itself. Before leaving, he handed my father a small envelope that had been placed beside grandfather's body. Inside was a brass key and a handwritten note containing 3 simple warnings. Do not throw her away. Do not cover her face. And whatever happens, never cut her hair after sunset. My father dismissed it as the confused ramblings of an old man, tucked the note into his pocket, and unlocked the front door. The house greeted us with the smell of old wood, incense, and dust. Everything inside looked exactly as grandfather had left it, from his neatly placed slippers by the entrance to the untouched altar in the living room. It felt less like an abandoned home, and more like a place that was still waiting for someone to return. We spent the next hour sorting through my grandfather's belongings, hoping to finish before another snowstorm trapped us in the village. While searching a cabinet beside the family altar, my father used the small brass key from the envelope to unlock a hidden compartment. Inside were several old notebooks, stacks of yellowed newspaper clippings, and a carefully sealed wooden box. The earliest journal belonged to my grandfather's older brother, Haruto, and it revealed the story of the doll. In 1938, Haruto had bought it as a gift for his little sister, Okiku, after seeing it in a shop window in Sapporo. The doll looked so much like her that he spent all the money he had saved just to bring it home. Okiku loved it instantly, carrying it everywhere she went, dressing it in tiny handmade clothes, and refusing to sleep without it beside her. But only a few months later, she became seriously ill and died before her 4th birthday. Heartbroken, the family placed the doll on a small altar to remember her. Then something impossible began to happen. The doll's black hair, which had originally ended near its jaw, slowly started growing. At first, the family believed they were imagining it, but within a year, it reached the doll's shoulders, and after several more years, it had grown halfway down its back. Every time they cut it, the hair returned, longer than before. Haruto became convinced that his little sister's spirit now lived inside the doll, speaking to it, celebrating her birthday, and treating it as though she had never truly left. My grandfather dismissed those beliefs as grief and superstition. until 1956, when Haruto mysteriously disappeared. His shoes were discovered beside a frozen river, but his body was never found. From that day forward, my grandfather became the doll's caretaker, and his own journals gradually changed. The calm handwriting became shaky and uneven as he described footsteps echoing through empty hallways, doors opening by themselves, whispers from unseen children, and the feeling that the doll was watching him whenever he entered the room. Then I found a single sentence that made my blood run cold. I made the mistake of cutting her hair after sunset. She cried until morning. At that moment, the warning in my grandfather's final note no longer sounded like the ramblings of a dying old man. It sounded like the desperate advice of someone who had survived something he could never explain. Even after reading the journals, my father refused to believe any of it. He insisted the stories were nothing more than generations of superstition and decided we would spend one final night in the house before taking the doll to a nearby temple in the morning. By then, the snowstorm had become too dangerous to drive through, leaving us stranded until sunrise. My parents slept in the downstairs bedroom while I took a room across the hall. My younger sister, Emmy, begged to stay upstairs with the doll, claiming it didn't want to be alone, but my mother refused and carried her downstairs. Before going to bed, my father draped a white cloth over the doll's face, despite my reminding him of grandfather's warning. He simply laughed, saying he wasn't about to let an old ghost story tell him what to do. Sometime after midnight, I woke to 3 slow knocks echoing through the hallway outside my room. At first, I thought it was my father checking on me, but when I opened the door, the hallway was completely empty. Then I heard a child's whisper call my name. It sounded exactly like Emmy. I followed the voice downstairs, where the house had fallen eerily silent. The fire in the living room had burned out, and the white cloth that had covered the doll now lay crumpled on the floor. The doll was still sitting on the family altar, but its head was turned directly toward the staircase, as if it had been waiting for me. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things until its glass eyes slowly blinked. I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall hard enough to wake my parents. My father rushed in with a flashlight, but by the time its beam reached the altar, the doll's head was facing forward again, as though nothing had happened. He dismissed it as a nightmare and covered the doll's face once more. This time, before any of us could walk away, a quiet giggle drifted from beneath the cloth. We all froze. The laughter continued for several seconds, soft and unmistakably childlike, while the fabric over the doll's face slowly rose and fell, as though something underneath it was breathing. My father ripped the cloth away, but the doll sat perfectly still. Then Emmy appeared silently in the doorway behind us and looked straight at the doll before whispering words that made the room feel even colder. She told you not to cover her face. The storm showed no sign of ending, and by morning, every road leading out of the village had been closed. We were trapped for another day. My father called the local temple, and an elderly priest agreed to come as soon as the weather improved. But the moment my father mentioned the doll, the priest's voice changed. He warned us not to damage it, and above all, not to let a child stay near it. Before my father could ask why, the line went dead. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence, until my mother suddenly called us into the living room. The doll's hair had changed. Just the night before, it rested above its shoulders. Now it hung halfway down its kimono. My father examined it again and again, convinced someone was playing a cruel trick on us, but there was no explanation. Emmy slapped his hand away and whispered, "She doesn't like being touched." That was enough. Frustrated and determined to prove the entire story was nonsense, my father grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen. My mother begged him to wait until sunrise, reminding him of grandfather's final warning, but he ignored her. "It's only a doll," he said, gathering the long black hair in one hand before cutting it just below the chin. The sharp snap of the scissors echoed through the room. At that exact moment, every light in the house went out. Darkness swallowed us. A deafening crash came from upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of small footsteps running across the floor. My father switched on his flashlight with trembling hands, and its beam swept across the room. The doll was gone. It had vanished from the table. My mother cried out as the light finally found it sitting silently in the corner of the room. its head hanging low while the freshly cut strands of hair lay scattered around it in a perfect black circle. Then we heard it, a little girl sobbing upstairs. It wasn't Emmy. She was clinging to my mother beside me. The crying came from the locked bedroom where we had first found the doll. My father ordered us to stay behind as he climbed the stairs alone. A few seconds later, his terrified scream shattered the silence. We rushed after him and found him frozen in the doorway. Every wall inside the room had been covered with deep scratches, some no bigger than a child's fingernails, others carved so deeply they exposed the wood beneath the plaster. And in the middle of the floor, arranged from freshly cut black hair, were 5 words that turned my blood to ice. "Why did you cut me?" Before anyone could speak, my mother pointed into the hallway. The doll was no longer sitting. It was standing at the far end of the corridor on its own tiny feet, its head slowly lifting until its dark eyes met ours. Panic swept through the house. My father rushed forward and locked the doll inside an old wooden box, wrapping it tightly with rope before dragging it into the storage room. We pushed furniture against the door and stayed together in the living room, too terrified to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, the silence was broken by a loud bang from inside the storage room. Then another. The box was slamming itself against the walls. The ropes snapped one by one, and the door slowly creaked open. Standing in the darkness was the doll. Its hair had already grown back, hanging all the way to its waist. Then its tiny mouth opened, and in a voice that sounded both like a child and something far older, it whispered a single name. Haruto. Suddenly, memories hidden inside my grandfather's journals began to make sense. Haruto had never abandoned the doll. He had tried to destroy it by carrying it into a frozen river, believing whatever lived inside it was no longer his little sister. But only Haruto disappeared. The doll somehow returned, and my grandfather had spent the rest of his life guarding it. As the creature stepped closer, its porcelain face cracked apart, revealing something dark moving beneath the surface. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, and its glass eyes became wet, almost human. Before it could reach me, Emmy stepped into the hallway and calmly said, "Stop." The creature froze. Looking directly at it, she whispered, "You're not Okiku." For a brief moment, the doll's face changed. It no longer looked frightening. It looked like a lonely little girl begging not to be abandoned again. Then the smile returned, exposing rows of tiny human teeth. At that moment, I discovered Haruto's final notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Inside was the truth. Whatever had entered the doll during Okiku's funeral fed on grief and memories, using the little girl's appearance to trap anyone who loved her. Haruto's final instructions explained that the creature could only be weakened at sunrise by cutting its hair and burning it alongside the real Okiku's belongings buried beneath the family altar. We rushed downstairs as the first light of dawn began creeping over the mountains. My mother uncovered a small wooden box hidden beneath the altar, containing Okiku's hair ribbon, tiny sandals, photographs, and the toys she had loved in life. Outside in the snow, my father held the struggling doll while I waited for the sun's first rays. The moment daylight touched the mountains, I cut through its long black hair. The strands writhed across the snow like living snakes, screaming with dozens of different voices. Emmy lit a match and dropped it onto Okiku's belongings. Flames raced across the ground, surrounding the doll. It screamed, first in the voice of a frightened child crying for her brother, then in the deep, monstrous voice of the thing that had been hiding behind her face all along. As the last strand of hair burned away, a cloud of black smoke burst from the doll's shattered mouth, carrying countless ghostly faces before the wind scattered them into the forest. When the fire finally died, nothing remained except a cracked porcelain shell. Whatever had worn Okiku's face for so many years was finally gone, or so we believed. By the time the roads reopened that afternoon, the temple priest had finally reached the house. He carefully gathered the doll's cracked remains and told us that cursed objects like this are never truly destroyed. They are only separated from the memories that give them power. A memorial was later built for the real Okiku, allowing people to remember the little girl instead of the darkness that had stolen her name. For a while, life returned to normal. Emmy stopped talking to invisible friends. My father burned every one of my grandfather's journals, and we never spoke about those 2 nights again. Years passed. I grew up, got married, and eventually became a father myself. Then, on my daughter's 4th birthday, a package arrived without a return address. Inside was a faded red hair ribbon and a photograph of the Okiku doll sitting inside its glass display case at the temple. Its hair now reached the floor. Written on the back of the photograph were just a few words. "Brother, you cut my hair, but you never said goodbye." Horrified, I immediately called the temple. An elderly priest answered and quietly explained that Father Sato had died years earlier. When I asked whether the doll was still there, he hesitated before saying, "Yes, but this morning, we found the display case open." My heart stopped. "Was the doll stolen?" I asked. "No," he replied. "The doll is still inside." Confused, I asked what had happened. The priest took a slow breath before answering. "Because there is now something else inside the case with her." "What?" I whispered. "A photograph. Of your family." Before I could speak again, I heard my daughter laughing in the next room. I ran to her bedroom and slowly pushed the door open. She was sitting on the floor, happily brushing the long black hair of a small doll, dressed in a faded red and gold kimono. As if it had been waiting for me, the doll slowly lifted its head. Its hair brushed against the floor, and from somewhere deep inside its cracked porcelain mouth came a voice I had prayed never to hear again. "Brother." The real Okiku doll still sits inside a temple in Hokkaido, and many visitors claim its hair continues to grow to this day. Priests still trim it, but only in daylight, and only after offering prayers for the little girl whose name it carries. Visitors are warned never to touch the glass, never to photograph the doll after sunset, and never to let children wander too close. Because sometimes, when the temple grows silent, a child's voice can still be heard from inside the display case. She asks visitors whether they have a brother or a sister, and if she likes the answer, she asks one final question. "Will you take me home?"